Hey guys, so today I'm going to be talking about the Sino-African relationship after the state visit that was made to South Africa. So for a long time, countries have been influencing different parts of Africa, starting in the 1800s in the colonial age, but since then attitudes have quite clearly changed from that, and colonialism is pretty much globally condemned. And so now that China is becoming more powerful, it's looking to other places that that it can influence or use as well. And this is leading to some calls that this is being called colonialism from some figures in Europe or America, looking at it in that kind of way. Also, there's an African sort of side to it as well that, for example, Lamido Suruzi, I probably butchered the pronunciation, but he was a Nigerian head of a Nigerian bank, I think, and he just recently said that he sees the Chinese influence as a kind of new form of imperialism. So it's an African opinion as well. And people are pretty divided on why China's there and what it's really doing there. And more than that, if it's going to be successful in what it's doing there. So I think before we answer that question, we have to ask, what exactly are the Chinese doing there? Well, they're actually doing all kinds of different things. They're building infrastructure, roads, railways, things like that. They're also bringing in export and import banks, copper mines and oil rigs, and things for extracting resources, which can cause a bit of conflict as well, given that a lot of the locals there have no means to extract those resources themselves, although it's their own land. This is going on in all over Africa, Zambia, Angola. Trade going on as well. Lots of Chinese people just traveling there just to sell their produce or whatever, seeing that as the next business stage, really. There's also just a lot of just genuine help going on, I think. If you look at in the South Sudan conflict, you've got the Chinese UN peacekeepers that it seems to me are being pretty helpful there. So what's the other side of it? Well, China's actually having pretty much the same problems as Western investors have been having for a long time. There's things like a lack of infrastructure. Taking, for example, in the Congo recently, China expected to invest $6 billion there, and it ended up only being $1 billion because of the lack of infrastructure, because no roads, because actually the villages were found to be fairly hostile sometimes. And because every time they tried to plant crops, they got stolen. So that didn't go too well. So I think you can see why some of the Chinese people that I've actually talked to actually see Chinese investment in Africa as a bit of a waste themselves. So I think there's some resistance even from Chinese people against the Chinese influence in Africa. However, on the African side, there are people that are suspicious of the Chinese influence as well. I think they can see how parts of China have ended up and are worried for their own environment. They're also worried that all of this construction is going on without any skills being transferred to the local people. Although increasingly that's not being the case. I mean, there was recently a mall that's being built in Angola, I think, that was actually is going to be the biggest in sub-Saharan Africa. And I think the figure was 20 to 1 of the African workers to Chinese workers. So I think that's really improving, or it seems to me to be doing so. And I think as well, there are Africans that just really respect the Chinese for the development that they're adding to Africa as well. Not only that, but China is by no means the only country looking to develop in Africa. amongst America, amongst a lot of European countries and India as well. I think I read an Economist article that said that China is only one amongst so many countries just jostling for development. And particularly India is projected to invest $100 billion in Africa as a whole, and its investment and involvement in Africa is growing at a faster rate than China's, and it's soon going to overtake America in Africa, sorry, according to projections. But I think the takeaway from this is that China is only one of a lot of countries that are involved in Africa, so it doesn't seem to be that well-founded a worry to me. And also they're not actually being that successful in themselves. I think Brautigan and not only that, but the effect that China is having in Africa, I think, is quite often a good one. And as well as that, they're having a good influence, creating infrastructure and things like that, and nurturing labour as well. And finally, I think going on for the future, as I mentioned in my talk about the Chinese pollution here in Beijing, a good future prospect for China is to invest in green energy, and that's exactly what Africa is looking to do as well, actually, as possibly the first ever continent or countries to have a green industrial revolution, which is quite exciting. They've promised to have created 300 gigawatts of energy by 2030, which is quite impressive considering the fact that so far they create 160 gigawatts of energy without it, altogether. So that's really quite ambitious from the African continent, which is quite exciting. And I think with China's future policies that China and Africa could really work quite well together for a really great future. I hope so.